Let's dive right into this explainer. You know, when you hear the name Isaac Newton, you almost certainly picture this serene, quiet scholar, right? He's sitting peacefully under a tree, and boom, an apple gently bunks him on the head, and he suddenly discovers gravity. Well, forget that. It's a highly sanitized myth. As we're going to see today, that picturesque little image couldn't be further from the truth. Because behind the pristine laws of physics that literally rule our universe was a man driven by profound childhood trauma, some incredibly dark secret obsessions, and a ruthless, almost terrifying pursuit of absolute truth.
Take a look at this. In his 20s, Newton actually wrote out a list of his past sins, and he included this chilling confession, threatening my father and Mother Smith to burn them and the house over them. I mean, wow, this wasn't just your standard teenage angst. See, his biological father died before he was even born. And then when little Isaac was just 3 years old, his mother remarried a wealthy clergyman named Smith and just moved away. She abandoned Isaac, leaving him with his grandparents. And that deep-seated feeling of abandonment fueled this lifelong anger in him. It made him fiercely solitary and incredibly suspicious of pretty much everyone around him.
Honestly, his survival as an infant was a miracle all on its own. He was born prematurely on Christmas Day in 1642, and he was so incredibly fragile and tiny that his mother was told he could literally fit inside a quart-sized mug. They didn't even expect him to survive his first few days. So, growing up, fatherless, sickly, and in this deeply loveless environment, it fundamentally forged a mind that was intensely competitive. He had to rely entirely on himself, so he turned inward. He retreated into the world of mechanics and his own imagination, rather than ever really connecting with other human beings. And that intense isolation brings us to his miracle years. Okay, so it's 1665, and a devastating wave of the bubonic plague is ravaging England, forcing all the universities to close. So a 22-year-old Isaac Newton retreated from Cambridge back to his childhood home for about 18 months of absolute uninterrupted isolation. During this self-imposed exile, which historians call his miracle years, he completely rewired human understanding. In mere months, he develops the early concepts of a totally new branch of mathematics, calculus. He formulated the theory of universal gravitation, reasoning that the exact same force pulling an apple to the ground is what keeps the moon in orbit. And he figured out that white light is actually a heterogeneous mixture of all the colors of the rainbow. He basically conceptualized the math and physics that rule our entire universe, all while hiding from a global pandemic. But to prove his theories about light and optics, he went to visceral, almost terrifying extremes. He literally took a bodkin, which is a thick, blunt sewing needle, and slid it straight into his own eye socket. He wedged it between his eyeball and the bone just to alter the shape of his retina. Why? Because he wanted to record firsthand how that applied pressure changed his perception of color. It is a wild example of his fanatical dedication to the truth. He completely disregarded his own personal safety to get answers.
But that was his public face. Let's move on to alchemy and the apocalypse.
We just talked about his rational, scientific discoveries, but behind closed doors, Newton harbored a shocking secret life. 25. That is the staggering number of years he spent secretly obsessing over alchemy. Yes, the revered father of modern physics was basically acting like a wizard in a hidden laboratory. He was desperately searching for the mythical philosopher's stone, a legendary substance that alchemists believed could turn base metals into gold, and, if consumed, could grant human immortality. Actually, he spent arguably more time experimenting with these mystical concoctions than he did on classical physics. And his obsessions definitely didn't stop at alchemy. He secretly wrote over 7,500 pages of theology by hand. See, Newton firmly believed that the Bible wasn't just a religious text. He thought it was a literal cipher. He was absolutely convinced that ancient writings, specifically the book of Daniel from the Old Testament, hold a hidden code to the natural world and the future of humanity. It was like a giant puzzle to him, and he believed he was the only one brilliant enough to decipher it. So what did all that intense biblical decoding lead to? Well, a chilling calculation. Through his exhaustive study of apocalyptic religious texts, Newton actually crunched the numbers and made a firm mathematical prediction that the world as we know it will end in the year 2060. He made a point to note that it might end later, but he saw absolutely no reason for it to end any sooner than 2060. Furthermore, all these theological deep dives led him to Unitarianism. This is the belief that God is a single entity, which strictly rejects the core Christian doctrine of the Holy Trinity. Now, you might be wondering, why does this matter? Well, because in 17th century England, holding this view wasn't just frowned upon, it was considered extreme heresy. As a prominent professor at Trinity College in Cambridge, denying the Trinity could have completely ruined his life, or frankly, ended it. So he fiercely, desperately hid these unorthodox views from the public for his entire life. Which leads us to a dark chapter: madness and Mercury. After decades of extreme isolation, grueling study, and all these secret occult practices, Newton's mind inevitably unraveled. The symptoms of his severe breakdown in 1693 were both heartbreaking and terrifying. He suffered from debilitating insomnia, going days on end without sleeping a wink. He developed intense paranoia, completely losing his grip on reality for about a year and a half. He started writing these unhinged, accusatory letters to his few remaining friends, including the famous philosopher John Locke, claiming they were conspiring against him or trying to entangle him with women. His supposedly invincible mind had just completely collapsed. And the root cause of this madness? Well, modern analysis of his remains points to a horrifying culprit. Lethal levels of toxic mercury were found in his hair. His beloved secret alchemical experiments, where he was routinely boiling and handling heavy metals in totally unventilated rooms, literally poisoned his brain. Scholars now strongly believe that this intense heavy metal toxicity directly triggered his severe psychological breakdown. But he did recover, and that brings us to his next phase: the ruthless ruler. Following his recovery, Newton fundamentally changed as a person. He basically left his isolated academic life in Cambridge behind to enter a chilling second act in London, where he wielded absolute, terrifying power. He took the job of warden and eventually master of the Royal Mint. At the time, England was facing a massive currency crisis because people were clipping the silver edges off coins. Well, Newton approached this problem with cold, calculated precision. He literally recalled and melted down the nation's entire currency, minting £7 million in new clip-proof coins. But here's the crazy part. He didn't just fix the money. He actively became an investigator. He relentlessly hunted down counterfeiters and coin clippers. He built this shadowy network of informants, prosecuted the culprits without an ounce of mercy, and personally watched them hang at the gallows. And that ruthless, vindictive nature absolutely extended to his scientific peers. One of the most famous examples of this is his toxic, decades-long feud with a brilliant fellow scientist named Robert Hooke. Hooke had dared to challenge Newton's theories on optics and even claimed that he was the one who gave Newton the foundational ideas for gravity. Well, Newton, who was deeply insecure and held a massive grudge, never, ever let it go. His revenge against Hooke played out like a calculated, cold-blooded timeline. Step 1, simply wait until Robert Hooke dies, which happened in 1703. Step 2, immediately seize power as president of the Royal Society. And Step 3, use that absolute, unchecked authority to destroy the only known portrait of Hooke that the society possessed. To this very day, no portrait of Robert Hooke exists. Newton practically erased his rival's face from human history forever, just out of spite. And Hooke wasn't his only target. When the brilliant German mathematician Gottfried Leibniz published his own, totally independent work on calculus, Newton flew into an absolute rage. He claimed he had invented it decades prior during those miracle years. But instead of having a fair academic debate, Newton completely abused his presidential power at the Royal Society. He secretly wrote the Society's supposedly impartial report himself, falsely ruling that Leibniz was a plagiarist, and viciously campaigned to destroy the German scholar's reputation entirely. So we are left with an immortal, dark legacy. How do we even begin to process a historical figure like this? Because we are essentially looking at two totally different men. On the one hand, you have the public Newton, the absolute beacon of the scientific revolution, the inventor of calculus, the creator of the laws of motion and the reflecting telescope. Just pristine logic and reason. But on the exact opposite side, you have the private Newton, a man totally consumed by alchemy, obsessively decoding apocalyptic prophecies, and executing the vengeful, systematic destruction of his rivals. The pristine logic of his scientific laws stands in stark, almost jarring contrast to the chaotic, dark, and ruthless reality of his private life. Which leaves us with this final, really crucial point to ponder. Was Newton's dark side the necessary price for history's greatest scientific mind? Think about it. Could a normal, well-adjusted person with a happy childhood have conquered the universe's greatest secrets? Or did the world absolutely require the obsessive trauma, the blinding isolation, and the merciless drive of Isaac Newton? It is a fascinating question. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope it leaves you looking at the genius behind gravity in a completely new light.